Okay, our next presenter is Rashmi Ghonasgi, and they're from the Clinical Psychology Master's Program.
When we think about substance use, we often consider it only from a single substance paradigm, for example, alcohol use or cannabis use. However, amongst people who meet criteria for substance use disorders, using more than one substance is pretty common. Enter polysubstance use. Polysubstance use is described as the use of two or more substances and can be broken down into two broad patterns of use. We have simultaneous polysubstance use, which denotes the use of two or more substances so that the effects overlap or at the same time. For example, that can look like getting crossfaded at a party where an individual might use cannabis and alcohol together. On the other hand, we have concurrent polysubstance use, which involves the use of two or more substances so that the effects do not overlap. For example, that can look like having a cigarette in the morning and a beer in the evening so that the effects do not overlap with one another. Where things get sticky is that these two different patterns of polysubstance use are differentially associated with risky behavior. For example, one study found that amongst people who use alcohol and cannabis, those who use it together are at higher odds of impaired driving compared to those who use those two substances differently. My research seeks to examine these two patterns of polysubstance use, specifically the mechanisms that drive these two patterns. The mechanisms that we're planning on looking at are alcohol demand and delayed discounting, both of which are informed by behavioral economic theory of substance use. Behavioral economics is a theoretical framework that essentially posits that we can look at substance use behavior via economic principles. Essentially, what we're saying is that the substance in this case is the good or commodity. So for example, for alcohol demand, that might sound similar to a good or commodity demand curve because it essentially denotes the same thing. What is the cost that a person is willing to pay in order to have the substance of their choice, in this case, alcohol? On the other hand, delay discounting is a little bit more complicated, but essentially is a measure of how much an individual might prefer a short-term smaller reward over a long-term larger one. In the context of substance use, that can look like using substances over the long-term reward of maybe not using that substance. We often find that amongst those who are at highest risk for developing substance use disorders, they usually have pretty high demand for the substance of their choice, as well as pretty steep delay discounting, meaning they're not really considering the long-term consequences of using that substance or what potential rewards they could get if they didn't use that substance. My research seeks to examine these two indices using a multi-level model framework, as well as an EMA design with 7 daily diary surveys. So we'll ask participants to submit their daily delay discounting, their daily alcohol demand, as well as their next 24-hour substance use, so that we can compare fluctuations in these two indices as well as kind of the outcome, which in this case would be their substance use behavior. Additionally, through using a multi-level model framework, we'll also be able to compare people to each other as opposed to just within each other. So we'll be able to examine these patterns of polysubstance use between individuals as well. In doing so, we hope to not only contribute to pre-existing literature on polysubstance use, because there's not a lot, but also look at potential intervention targets in the event that somebody would like to change their substance use behavior and they use more than one substance. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashmi. Rashmi's advisor is Lydia Meshesha.